Hello. This is a presentation about Erick Erickson by Alexa Desjardins. Here's a little background information about the man himself. Erick Erickson was born on June 15, 1902 in Frankfurt, Germany. He passed away a month before his 92nd birthday on May 12, 1994 in Harwich, Massachusetts. Erick Erickson was an artist turned teacher that came up with a psychosocial theory pertaining to the needs of children. Here's more background information on Erick Erickson. Today, Erickson is known and remembered as a psychoanalyst. He was influenced by Sigmund Freud. Erick Erickson studied three aspects pertaining to identity. The first aspect is the ego identity, also known as self. This has to do with the individual. The next aspect is personal identity. This has to do with the characteristics that differentiate a person from another. Last but not least is the social or cultural identity. This has to do with the roles a person might socially exhibit or the collection of social roles a person might have. Erick Erickson is also a founder. He founded a branch of psychology. This branch is called the psychosocial theory. The psychosocial theory is a theory in which development is described in terms of 8 stages that span childhood and adulthood, each offering opportunities for personality growth and development. Again, there are 8 stages of psychosocial development. The first stage is trust versus mistrust. The second is autonomy versus shame and doubt. The third is initiative versus guilt. The fourth is industry versus inferiority. The fifth is identity versus role confusion. The sixth is intimacy versus isolation. The seventh is generativity versus stagnation. And the eighth and final stage is integrity versus despair. As you can see in this picture diagram, each stage is color-coded, representing a stage of life. The first stage, starting at the mistrust and trust, would be infant. The second would be toddler. Third would be preschooler. Fourth would be grade schooler. Fifth would be teenager. Sixth would be young adult. Seventh would be middle-aged adult. And eighth would be older adult. Each stage increases in complexity as an individual gets older. Let's talk about conflict. Erick Erickson believed that each of a human's 8 stages of development is described using a conflict. The conflict leads to opportunities for personal growth. These conflicts describe social tasks that are required for healthy development. An example would be trust. With the infant stage of trust and mistrust, the best possible outcome would be trust. If needs aren't met to obtain trust, there is a negative social outcome, mistrust. All in all, trust versus mistrust is described as a conflict. Who does this theory affect? The theory looks at and centers around the relationships of a person as well as the person only. So it centers around one person and branches out to the relationships that the person has. For instance, an infant and then the relationships that the infant has with his or her mother and father. The psychosocial theory covers a person from infancy to older adulthood. For the purpose of this presentation, we will look at how the theory relates to early childhood education. We will be looking at the first 4 stages, and again, there are 8 stages. The first 4 stages are the infant stage, the toddler stage, the preschool age stage, and then last but not least, the grade school age stage. The first stage of Erick Erickson's psychosocial theory is the infant stage, and this typically ranges from birth to 18 months of age. The development of trust is so crucial and a necessity for infants during this stage of life. An infant must trust their caregiver and provider to give them what they need, when they need it, on a consistent basis. So food, nurturing, sleep, and a regulation of their body temperatures are constantly cared for so much that an infant can predict and know that their needs will be met. A trust is developed by an infant for their caregivers because they aren't left to feel uncared for. They are provided for. If needs are not met, then a sense of mistrust develops in themselves and others. This means an infant is not getting food, nurturing, sleep, and warmth when they need it or want it. This will cause an infant to not trust and develop negative characteristics and emotions that they will have for a lifetime, such as hostility. I couldn't resist putting a picture of my infant son. I definitely agree with Erick Erickson's theory because I see how consistently caring for my son gives him a sense of trust. I don't let him sit and cry. I cater to his needs, which compared to at the beginning, he now doesn't cry very much. He gives us babbling and cooing warnings when he wants something rather than initially crying. He cries after he tries. Rather than look mad or detached, he smiles so much, especially upon just hearing his parents' voices, and especially when he sees our faces. I see the relationship aspect Erickson talks about among self and relationships in this stage, just by looking at my son. The second stage is autonomy versus shame. Children are 18 months through 3 years during this stage, which is marked by efforts in trying new things. Children are dabbling with independence while still being dependent on caregivers. A sense of autonomy is developed if a child feels success in trying new things pertaining to motor, language, and cognitive abilities. Good self-esteem and pride is established when they are successful and are made to feel that they are successful. Shame occurs when they are not sure of themselves and they are made to feel unsuccessful. A great example is when potty training begins and a child uses the toilet for the first time. When parents are encouraging and children are using the toilet on their own, their self-esteem shoots through the roof. If they aren't able to use the toilet on their own and their parents are constantly scolding them, they feel ashamed and might constantly wet the bed. You'll see their self-esteem drop when they cannot achieve this new thing. The third stage is initiative versus guilt in regards to 3-year-olds to 5-year-olds. These are our preschoolers. They are also our little explorers and observers. They are beginning to expand and explore their minds as they observe and play with things around them. They are watching and wanting to interact with people around them, especially children their age. However, they are still dabbling with their independence. They are beginning to understand gender roles. Preschoolers need guidelines and expectations along with time to explore and observe. This fosters initiative, while not allowing them to explore and observe will cause them to feel guilt and failure because they are not understanding of the world around them. Moreover, they don't know purpose or why things occur. Erickson introduces us to social role identification in this stage. Future teachers, be mindful. There are little ears and eyes constantly on you, wanting to mimic what you do. The fourth and last stage we will discuss is the industry versus inferiority stage. Children are 6 years old to 12 years old, or when they hit puberty. Children are wanting to focus more on learning in themselves and their abilities, skills, talents, and accomplishments. This is marked by industry. In this stage, social status becomes more important to children. If a child does not feel capable, settles, or has low self-esteem, they will feel inferiority. I am a huge fan of Erick Erickson's psychosocial theory, especially the first 4 stages that pertains to children. I like it because he gives educators a look on how children develop as well as their roles on children. I think that educators need to be mindful of these roles. There is an emphasis on play. Play is extremely important for the developing child. There's also an emphasis that each stage needs to carry on to the next stage. So a stage never ends just because a child is a certain age. There must always be trust, autonomy, initiative, and industry for a child to feel successful and to be successful. I believe that teachers need to be aware of needs and the consequences of not meeting needs. This is similar to my philosophy because I do feel that I need to be mindful of the needs of each one of my children that I teach. I also believe, and this coincides with my philosophy as well as Erick Erickson's theory, that trying new things and experiences and activities will help foster a child's growth. If they do not try anything new, how will they learn? We must be able to understand that each child needs to understand that there are expectations within society, and we can do this by starting in our classroom, by setting rules and regulations and expectations within our own classrooms. I also like that Erickson brought up that allowing time to play, especially with materials, open-ended materials, coincides with my philosophy. We must allow time, space, and materials to support and build a sense of industry. Children need to know that they can do things and that they can make things and that they are not just there to be taught or preached at. They are there to learn and explore their minds and to see what they can do. I'm going to go on to tell a story about how Erick Erickson's theory reminds me of an experience I had when I was an assistant kindergarten teacher. I was an assistant kindergarten teacher for 3 kindergarten teachers. There were 2 great teachers and there was 1 not so great teacher. This particular teacher would constantly yell at the children that were only 5 years old, some 6. She would constantly put them down. She would constantly allow for them not to learn. So if they said they didn't want to learn and they'd throw their stuff down on the floor, she would leave them. She wouldn't try to encourage the children. And again, she would constantly yell and scream and belittle these young 5 and 6-year-olds. As I go through the list, she wasn't instilling trust, even though trust starts at infancy. She didn't carry that on. There was no trust from